Thank you all for joining us. As always, this is the Let My People Go monthly webinar. And this week, I'm really excited to have Dave Nammo from Christian Legal Society. And he's going to be sharing with us a little bit about what he does and how that benefits those who are most vulnerable. And so, David, are you there? All right.
I'm here, Ollie. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so glad you were able to join us.
It's great being here.
So could you tell me a little bit about the work of Christian Legal Society and just really what you do through them?
Christian Legal Society really does, sorry, I'm playing with the camera here, like four things, right? We're a national network of lawyers. And so Christian lawyers, we've got chapters all over the country. Christian lawyers gather together and they meet and they pray and they seek the Lord to see, what God's calling them to do. We're the only campus ministry on law school campuses all over the country because we think it's important that law students understand that the law is transcendent and that God has called them to the profession. And law school is a tough place, so usually our chapters are kind of an oasis. We've been doing religious freedom work since 1975. So was that 48 years? I don't know, my bad math. 43 years. And finally, for the past 20 years, we've been doing legal aid for the poor. So one of the things that happens when lawyers get together and pray and read the Bible, God changes them. And there's all this stuff, as you guys well know, to defend the widow and the orphan, to bring justice to the poor and the needy. And so we started doing Christian legal aid 20 years ago. And we've got about 60 clinics with over 140 locations all over the country that we help the poor and the needy with their legal work.
That's incredible. So you have been working with those who are most vulnerable and really helping them with legal fees, because I feel like sometimes for those of us in the church, when we think about caring for our neighbor, we can think about advocacy, we can think about meeting specific needs, but if someone needs a more professional advocate, like a lawyer, we don't know what to do. We're often thrown for a loop. How do people get connected with you if they need help?
There goes the other phone. Sorry about that. And so it's through the website. I mean, how does anybody find anybody anymore? But it's
right.
Through the website.
Absolutely.
But the thing with Christian Legal Aid, so there's a great organization out there called Legal Services Corporation. It's funded by the government, almost $500 million. We've actually helped them in some ways. We're big fans of theirs, but they don't partner with churches or gospel rescue missions or 12-step programs. So usually you'll find us in partnership with the ministries in inner cities or the suburbs that are working with the poor. And that's the thing about Christian Legal Aid, right? Is we join hands, and it's a holistic ministry, right? So if somebody's trying to get their life back together, if they've gone through a 12-step program, they're getting out of jail, or they're just trying to get a job, a lot of times there's some legal thing like hanging out here, right? They were charged with a crime, or they did something they shouldn't have, or they're just trying to get back on their feet. And usually it just takes a phone call from a lawyer, right? Or just a little bit of an effort or an expungement or something to help them get back on their feet. So we work closely with those that are working with the vulnerable all over the country. And it's one of the four things that we do.
That's incredible. Another one of the things you mentioned was religious freedom. This is a buzzword that we're hearing about on the news a lot, but a lot of us don't really know what that means. Could you help us understand, what does it mean to do the work of religious freedom?
So it is a buzzword, and it's become it stands for something on many cases, right? So the LGBT community actually believes the religious freedom means the right to discriminate against them, right? But people of faith see religious freedom as something that protects their right to worship and the right to exercise that worship, right? So, if you and I, right, we're Christians and we believe in a God, we believe God has something to say about our lives and he has a calling on our life, and the ability to live out that calling, right? Whether it's helping the poor or, however he's calling us to love our neighbor, right? That is how we as Christians live out our faith. And so for us, and all faiths, right? So for Jewish individuals, Muslim individuals, right, living out our faith is, and being able to do that, is essentially religious freedom. But, as a lawyer, I understand, right? So religious freedom, if that is a freedom, right, it's an inalienable right. It's in the First Amendment, right? And the First Amendment doesn't actually say, we're giving you the rights of religious freedom. What it says is the government can't interfere with these rights. These are inalienable rights, right? And so if the government gives you a right, then the government has the right to take that away. But religious freedom, right, as our founders saw it, as those that came over on the boats saw it, religious freedom is something that's inherent, right? It's like freedom of conscience, and it's given to us by God. And so the government can't take it away. So the government essentially, if you read all the founding documents, it was founded to protect religious freedom, to protect freedom of speech, to protect freedom of exercise, right? And freedom of the press and things like that.
And so one thing, like anytime we're loving those who are most vulnerable in our community, we're going to, regardless of what political leanings our community of faith may have, you're going to interact with people who may not share those political leanings. And how do you respond to those who say religious freedom is just a conservative issue, and it's a way that those who are conservative are trying to impact those who are progressive? What would you say to that?
I would say, well, of course, I don't agree with that. And I think religious freedom, up until a few years ago, religious freedom was the bedrock of this country, right? So the United States has been fighting for religious freedom, religious minorities, even Christian Legal Society, right? So we have fought for the rights of all religions in this country, not just Christians, because we understand as lawyers that if you dig a hole, you're going to fall in it. But if you build a net of religious freedom, you're going to fall into that. And so 40 years ago, when Christian Legal Society was one of the few groups in the country doing this work, right, we got out and defended Native Americans who wanted to smoke a drug called peyote because it was part of their religious exercise, right? And we got a lot of flack from the Christian community. We said, no, look, this is a principle, right? Because one day Christians are going to need to use that same principle, right? And so now here we are 40 years later, and Christians are seeing their rights abridged. So I would say, for Christian Legal Aid, what we tell people is, you know what, we are doing this because we're called, we love our neighbor, but we help anybody that comes through the door, right? It doesn't matter what your religion is. Even if you have no religion, we're going to help you. But for me, a lot of people are motivated by faith, and I think that's a good thing. And being motivated by faith means you want to live that out. So I don't think it's a conservative or a progressive or a Democrat or a Republican issue. I mean, when Bill Clinton signed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, it was a completely bipartisan bill. That was 1996, I think. I may have my year wrong. I mean, Republicans and Democrats stood shoulder to shoulder saying it's important that we as a nation protect, that the government, protect the rights of its individuals to express their beliefs in the way they see fit.
And that's really helpful to understand it in light of that context. I think it's really interesting because a lot of us don't realize that even the Constitution was shaped by a religious freedom document known as the Flushing Remonstrance. And very early on, and it was where Christians and Muslims and people of all faiths came together to really iron out some religious freedom issues in Flushing, Queens. I didn't know about that until I was sitting with a pastor, and he's like, no, let me tell you this. Let me drop some knowledge on you. This is not a new idea.
No.
This is not a new idea at all.
No, and Milton, okay, I know about this, and I was just reading a book the other day that said freedom of press, freedom of religion, like this freedom. It actually comes from an old Milton, like John Milton, a writing that he did years that I'd never heard of before. So, but this comes from the Magna Carta, right? That people are free, should be free to live out their lives. And so I think from the beginning of time, right, we've wanted freedom. Right at the beginning, we want a little too much freedom, but that's a different conversation.
Right.
But I will tell you. So the book just came out from David Horowitz, who is an he calls himself an agnostic Jewish guy, right? And it's called The Dark Agenda. And you can go watch his speech. They just launched his book. And he said he has moved from what he called radical, right, to the book is about the left's, what he calls the left's attempt to destroy Christianity in America. And he said, look, this is wrong because Christianity is important, faith is important, and he's an agnostic, right? And he said, look, if these rights are given to us, like I said, by the government, they can take it away. And without a belief in a higher power, a divine power, then, we're in trouble. And so I would say religious freedom is really, really important. And if the United States loses the fight for religious freedom, I don't know who carries the torch for the world, right? Who protects the religious minorities of the world? I mean, others will do it, but the United States does it better than anybody else. And we can never lose the torch of religious freedom.
Well, and it's interesting because you're talking about protecting those who are vulnerable due to their religious stance.
Yeah.
And that is something that a lot of us don't even think about. But there are persecuted groups, whether they be Christian, whether they be Jewish, whether they be Muslim, like there are people who are being persecuted for what they believe, and you see that as a cause. And I think that's beautiful. I know what Christian Legal Society does as far as legal aid helps those most vulnerable, but how does religious freedom intersect with the vulnerabilities that we're seeing both in our church community and the community outside the four walls?
So that's a tough thing, right? So in this country, we still have so much religious freedom. We really do, right? My father is an Iraqi Christian, right? And so the Iraqi Christian population has been decimated by the, ISIS, just slaughtered. And so, I get some of that, right? I haven't been over there to experience, but I understand it. But I would say, as I think about the church and the church loving its neighbor, right? The amount of work that the church does in this country, and when I say the church, I mean the church and the ministries of the church, right? So parachurch ministries and soup kitchens and battered women's shelters. Oh, I mean, just there's more than we can name, right? But to me, it's the work of the church in this country, and they are able to do that work and they're called to do that work because of who they are, because of the nature of who they are. And yes, some places share their faith. Yes, some places have prayer, but they're not going to turn anybody away from what I know, right? If you're in a battered women's shelter, they're going to take any woman that needs help and her children. Same with our legal aid clinics. Whoever walks through the door, we help them. It doesn't matter. Yeah, I believe Jesus called us to love our neighbor, and that's why I do it. But so the work that the church does in this country, right? We have a big welfare system, and somebody tried to monetize the work of the church, and it was trillions of dollars. I mean, if the work of the church flipped to what if they stopped all the work that the church did in this country and all the ministries did in this country for the poor and the vulnerable and all their work, and had the government do it, the government would be humongous, So the nature of the church that loves their neighbor, right? The religious liberty that they have to do that is important, right? So if somebody comes in and wants to be disruptive or stop them from doing it, I'll give you an example, and this is a hard example. And again, if somebody from the LGBT community hears this, they're going to be angry. But so there was a women's shelter in Alaska that turned away a transgender woman, right? A guy that he had not gone through the surgeries or anything else, and he was intoxicated. And they said, look, we're not interested. We just can't let you into this women's shelter, right? This is for battered women. We understand that you identify as a woman, but unless you're we only accept biological women. And they faced persecution from the Civil Rights Commission up in Anchorage. And oddly enough, when the lawyers went to defend them, they were charged by that Civil Rights Commission for saying things that they didn't like, and they were just defending their clients. So there are times when, as a church or a gospel rescue mission or a 12-step program, where we have to say, look, this is what we believe. And yes, this might not be a popular belief, but we are helping a lot of people. And I know those would say, well, then, you're not allowing adoptions, right? So they've shut down Catholic Charities in many states, right? Because they will not adopt their children out to same-sex couples. And I understand that the LGBT community sees that as harmful. But I would say on the flip side, there are many agencies that do adopt out to same-sex couples, but they've stopped. Catholic Charities had to pull out of, I think, Massachusetts, and I forget the state that they're fighting now, right? It's somewhere in the Midwest. And all those hundreds of kids that they're taking care of, right, are going to just fall back into the system because nobody likes, what Catholic Charities stands for. So to me, religious freedom, we do what we do because we have a biblical calling, right? We believe God has called us to this work. And churches do that, and ministries do that, and they should have the right to do that without fear of persecution, with the ability to do it alongside of those that disagree with them. That's how I would answer your question.
So that's very helpful, and it's helpful to hear your perspective on that, because oftentimes, I know I'm kind of new to even understanding this topic and learning about it. And so to kind of hear kind of why you focus on religious freedom and why you do it, that's very helpful. And I think for a lot of us, this is something that we're learning, because there is a lot of political rhetoric right now that is kind of circulating around this concept, and it can almost be a trigger word for some people. And so I think those who have been able to watch this today can hopefully kind of hear your perspective, and also maybe research more about what you guys do, but also the work of religious freedom. And with that in mind, could you give them a couple of things that they could do to learn more about not only Christian Legal Society, but religious freedom in general, as we kind of land the plane?
I'm happy to. So for lawyers doing religious freedom, so Christian Legal Society is different. There are a handful of other groups out there that just do religious freedom work. Obviously, we're doing work with the poor. We're also a campus ministry. But there's this great scene in the second Chronicles of Narnia, where this kind of half man, half ox holds this gate open so the army can escape, right? They're trapped. And that's what lawyers are doing, right? They're holding open the gates so that the church can continue its work. And not just the church, the synagogues, the mosques, right? So people of faith can continue the work that they're doing and that they're called to do because of their faith.
Right.
I would say, if you want to learn more about Christian Legal Society, of course, just Google us, right? But it's christianlegalsociety.org. I would say, and I've gotten a lot of phone calls from pastors recently that are concerned about, we do have biblical views on sexuality. We've got biblical views on X, Y, and Z. How can we make sure that we are not going to get in trouble, right? That the state's not going to come and close down our programs or threaten what we're doing, right? Because we want to continue to do what we do and keep the character of Christ along with it, right? And so a few years ago, Christian Legal Society partnered with other ministries. And so you can go to a website called religiouslibertyguidance.org. That's religiouslibertyguidance.org. And there's a webinar, a 1-hour webinar, and white papers and PowerPoints for churches, for schools, and for nonprofits. And those are we did 3 different webinars, and it's probably some of the best free legal advice out there. So if a church is trying to get on their feet or trying to figure out how to respond to, some difficult situations, all that is there. And so I welcome them to go to the Christian Legal Society website. But if you're a church and you're trying to figure out, you're putting together your documents, or you're trying to found a ministry, go to religiouslibertyguidance.org. And it's all there, and it's all for free. And it's there for free because good people like those listening support us, and that's how we're supported.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thanks, Raleigh. It's great being with you.
Yeah, great being with you. And until next time.
Absolutely.